Part 9 of Works of Sallust. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Works of Gaius Sallustius Crispus, translated by Alfred W. Pollard. Introduction to Jugurthine War. Sallust has himself informed us of the reasons which induced him to write the history of a period so painful in many respects to a patriotic Roman as that of the war with Jugurtha. It attracted him, he tells us, in the first place, as a great and severe contest waged with varying success, and in the second, as the occasion of resistance for being the first time made to the pride of the nobility, which resistance he regards as the prelude to all civil wars which afterwards exhausted Italy and the whole Roman world. The interest of his narration is therefore twofold, both military and political, and his success in bringing it home to his readers is by no means equal in the different parts of his work. In its military aspect, the war with Jugurtha is really of little importance. Some 120 or 30 years later, in the reign of Tiberius, another Numidian arose, who gave the Romans almost as much trouble as Jugurtha. Tacfarinas, like Jugurtha, had become acquainted with the Roman discipline. Like him, he was always, with one trifling exception, defeated in pitched battles. Like him, by surprises and petty skirmishes, he wore out the enemy whom he could not meet with success in the field. 2 Roman generals triumphed for bringing the war to a supposed conclusion, but each time, after an interval, Tacfarinas renewed it with as much and as little success as before, and, as in the case of Jugurtha, it was only brought to a final end by his death, after the contest had been carried on for 7 years, AD 17 to 24. Tacitus gives us a history of this war in some 7 chapters, Annals 2:52, 3:21-73-74, 4:23 to 25, and it may fairly be said that the knowledge we receive from these is quite as satisfactory as that which Sallust's prolix narration affords us of the conflict with Jugurtha. The materials indeed for writing a good military history of any war in Africa did not exist, and we therefore cannot blame Sallust for his failure. If he had had an accurate map of Numidia to refer to as he wrote, and the accounts of eyewitnesses to supply him with details of the several campaigns, there is no reason to doubt that he would have produced an excellent and thoroughly intelligible history of the war. The vivid description which he gives of the battle of the Muthul, where he had the account of one of the Roman officers, Publius Rutilius Rufus, to guide him, is a sufficient proof of his ability to deal with good materials when he possessed them. As it is, in the absence of all information as to the geography of the country, and with a chronology which seldom extends beyond such references as "after a few days," or "in the course of the same campaign," it is impossible to extract from the account of Sallust any clear idea of the details of the war. We have, indeed, certain sieges and battles assigned to the several campaigns, but the links connecting them are mostly wanting, and their place is inadequately supplied by repeated assertions that each new tactic of Metellus or Marius reduced Jugurtha to frenzy and despair, and then, after a while, had to be abandoned by the Roman general as ineffectual. Even in the case of the operations which he describes at length, it is often impossible to help feeling that the historian is drawing largely on his imagination, or, which comes to the same thing, is filling in some bare outline of fact which he found in his authorities, from the commonplace book of Roman military description. If we turn now to the chapters in which he deals with the politics of the capital, we shall find much more reason to be grateful to Sallust for his history of this period. It is true that his love of fine writing and his pompous affectation of a virtue which he did not possess seriously detract from the value of his work. The recurrence, too, of tags like "paucae quis omnia, honesta atque inhonesta, vendere mas erat," gives an annoying impression of pedantry and unreality to much that he says. Despite these drawbacks, however, Sallust often speaks of the relation of parties in Rome with all the weight of a practical and clear-headed politician, and for one who lived in the thick of the very struggle which he narrates the beginning, is singularly broad and comprehensive in his views. The period with which he deals is full of instruction. Gaius Gracchus had been murdered in BC 121, and from that time down to the end of the Jugurthine War, Senate and Democrats alike did nothing but demonstrate at once their power and their impotence. The Senate could recall Pompilius, uphold Opimius at least for a time, and prevent any further divisions of the domain land by converting as much of it as still remained in private hands at first into perpetual leaseholds, and afterwards into full freeholds. As was shown, however, by the prosecutions of BC 110 and again in BC 105, and by the election of Marius to the consulship, it became utterly powerless as soon as the mob asserted its will. It could not even defend its successful general Metellus from a most unjust attack, or prevent the whole credit of terminating the war, which was really due to Metellus and Sulla, falling to the democratic leader Marius. It is significant indeed that at this crisis of their fate the aristocracy of Rome could find no better commander than Marcus Aemilius Scaurus, a man who, except by some village triumphs in the Alps, had never in his life distinguished himself, whose morality was no higher than that of his fellows, and who, when the storm came, was quite ready to surrender his party so long as he could save himself. On the other hand, the Democrats were not much better. They could assert their power by persecuting the nobility on the occasion of any disaster to the state, but they were destitute of any worthy policy which they could unite to pursue. Their narrowness of view and anarchistic tendencies alienated from them the two allies by whose help they might have obtained a peaceful triumph over the Senate. The Italians they had made their enemies by threatening to encroach on the domain lands held by the allied towns, and by the disfavor with which they regarded any proposals for a liberal concession of the full Roman franchise. As for the equites or capitalists, the disturbances in the streets of Rome had sufficed to estrange them from the party by whose help they had secured the control of the law courts. These two great powers were content to stand aside and allow the nobles and democrats to decide their battles by themselves, and as a result the nobles were enabled to maintain their monopoly of all the chief offices and prizes of the state, while the mob controlled supreme in the streets of Rome. Such a condition of affairs could not continue forever, and the Jugurthine War ushered in the military regime by which it was to be superseded. Not only was it this war that both Sulla and Marius made their name, but the change was effected by which the future generals in the civil war were provided with armies suitable to their purposes. Hitherto, levies had always been made from the respectable class of citizens, men who had some interest in the welfare of the state, and who looked on war as an evil to be brought to an end as soon as possible. Marius, when starting for Numidia, recruited his army from among the Capitae Censi, who had no stake in the country, but now adopted arms as their profession, and looked to their general for a reward. Armies composed of men like these murdered their commanders if they had become unpopular. If popular, they would follow them to death. But henceforth obedience was neither tendered nor refused out of any consideration of duty towards the state. This was a kind of force of which a Caesar could make use. End of Introduction to the Jugurthine War. Recording by James Christopher, jxchristopher@yahoo.com.